Welcome, everybody. My name is Haresh Singhani. This is Conversations with Haresh. We'll be talking to people of varied backgrounds, covering various topics. I'm very excited to be able to share these with you. The goal is to increase curiosity and empathy amongst all of us to help us grow professionally and personally at all levels. And of course, we also want to make sure that this is fun. So thank you again, and we'll look forward to having you. Hi, Adam. Welcome.
Hey, Haresh. How are you?
I'm doing good. I know we've been talking about this for a few weeks. I'm so glad we could, get this on your calendar. Thank you for being here again. As we were discussing earlier, I've been on this podcast project for, a few months, at least in the concrete form, and it's been in the making for a few years. I'm super excited to give our audience an opportunity to learn about your journey and your doings and, how life's been treating you, etc. So with that, would love to get an introduction of Adam. You can start wherever you wish and kind of also get to the point of, what you're involved in at Gamesight presently and how it's going. But if you want to just tell us about yourself a little bit, that'd be awesome. I know that you're, running Gamesight. You've been in gaming for a long time. It seems like it's a ever dynamic field.
Sure. Yeah. Let's see. Adam Lieb. I'm, I guess I would self-identify as an entrepreneur from Seattle. I live in Bellevue, the greater Seattle area. I have 2 9-year-olds that started 3rd grade 8 hours ago, something like that. So that's been,
First day.
Glad, first day after Labor Day. I'm glad to get them back in school. I can tell you that's been just this last week. We stay super busy in the summer, but this last week was kind of like the one down week where we kind of didn't really have anything going on, and getting them back to school, back to regularly scheduled programming is.
Are they twins?
They are twins. Yes. Yeah. I have a son and a daughter. So I get the A/B test and kind of the experience of I guess some broad spectrum of what parenting has to offer. So that's been, I would often joke, I run 1 startup in the day and 2 startups after that, and that's pretty much my life. So yeah, I've been running Gamesight since 2017. I guess that's at 6 years now. Been in, like you mentioned, been in gaming for pretty much my entire life, and I don't even really mean my adult life, but I started my first gaming company when I was 11, 25 years ago now. Pretty much, anything I can remember is in the video games industry. But yeah, I mean I suppose that's me in a nutshell. I'm a huge Seattle sports fan. I follow basically all the Seattle sports teams, and that's a big part of my life. I run a foundation with my wife and my brother called Seattle Legacy Fund. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. That's give like a summary of my life in 2 minutes. I suppose that's it. Data to run a startup.
It's a lot of interesting pieces, I suppose, to parse for us. Where did you study college?
Yeah, so I went to University of Washington. I graduated high school when I was 16 and started at UW. Funny, it's one of those things that at the time definitely sounded great. I really, I guess I'd say hated high school and was this just isn't for me. I'm ready to, I was running a company at the time. That was what my focus was on, not on what I considered at the time sort of the trivial pursuits of high school. And so I wanted to get out and get into college, which I did. I think looking back now, and especially now that I'm a dad and think about my kids' life and what I want for them, I certainly deprived myself of a lot of the, kind of life milestones that many children get to experience both in high school and college. And so, while I, kind of achieved my end, which was, getting through school, and, ideally, I wanted to spend my time working on something that was interesting and I was passionate about, and that was basically nothing I did in high school. So I was get to college and that'll change. And so yeah, I went to University of Washington. Then I went shortly after that, went to grad school at Pepperdine in Malibu. I did my JD MBA. I grew up mostly in Seattle. I moved here when I was about 5 and went through high school and then through college. And so as soon as I finished college, I was I'm ready to get to the sun. I was playing a lot of golf at the time. Playing golf in 40-degree weather in the rain in Seattle was well, geez, I got to get somewhere, it's sunny and warm.
More golf compatible weather.
Yeah, well, it's there's this school in Malibu on the beach. I was well, that sounds perfect. Let's go there. So, I spent a few years, basically living on the beach in Malibu in sunny Southern California. I got my law degree was why I went down there. I did my MBA when I was there. Met my wife. At some point I got down to about a my goal was to get to be a single digit handicap. I got to about a 10. So it was a pretty successful time for me. So it was kind of what I wanted. And then shortly after I finished school, my wife and I moved back. We got married, basically. I finished school, we got married, and then we moved up to Seattle, where we've been for the last decade, I guess.
So you mentioned you've been involved in the gaming domain pretty much forever, in the sense that probably before that you could not have been acting in any other professional capacity, right? Anyway, so were there people or places around you that kind of got you started in gaming, and then you discovered you really liked it, and then you just stayed or kept at it, or kind of how did it start?
No, really nothing like that. And, it's definitely one of the things, again, when I sort of reflect back, I think, how, there's so many awesome things that exist now that, basically didn't when, when I was a kid. I would say, I got into video games like, anyone got into video games. I was 5 years old or 4 years old, and, Nintendo, NES came out in America and started becoming popular. My parents bought one. I played Mario. It was fun. I played more games. It was fun. And, I just basically, grew a love for video games. I think like pretty normal for kids of my generation. I think what was maybe different for me is I remember, kind of distinctly the time where my parents or teachers or whatever who would say like, video games are a waste of time. What are you doing? This is like, no way for a person to spend their time. And I think as a, I don't know, probably natural contrarian, I don't disagree with you. That can't be true. And I was sort of like wanted to prove that wasn't true. And so I had this idea that it's like, well, if you can make money playing video games, then it can't be a waste of time. And like, kind of a bizarre thought, honestly, and I think back at it, like, it's not totally like cogent, but I was like, it made sense to me. I was like, okay, well, if I can make money playing video games, it can't be a waste of time. Then it's like, it's a job, instead of a paper route or whatever, like, I do this video game stuff. And so that's really how I got started. I was into computers, I was into programming. I learned to build websites when I was 10 years old, and started building some gaming focused websites. And that's really how I got my start, was just not really being interested in hearing the kind of like, video games is a waste of time. I was like, well, I can make it not a waste of time. It's sort of, again, funny when you look at it now, video games is a 200 and some odd $1 billion industry, depending on exactly how you count. It's bigger than TVs and movies combined. It's the largest form of entertainment in the world. I think the stat I saw the other day is like 4 billion people worldwide play games of some sort, video games of some sort. So yeah, I don't think in the 90s it wasn't a thing that was like, hey, when you grow up, why don't you can work in video games? That's like a real job and a career path. It really wasn't. I think it is now. I mean, certainly, it's funny, my kids, their school, there's 2 third grade classes, each one's in a different class. And among the parents, there are 4 dads that all work in video games, which I think is the single greatest density of professions. Like, lawyers, there's like 3 or 4 lawyers, there's probably 3 or 4 doctors, like, there's engineers, there's like other jobs that there's some concentration of. But I think like working in video games broadly is like maybe the number one or number 2 job. And obviously it's a, part of where we live. I think, someone works at Xbox, maybe 2 work at Xbox, someone works at Amazon Games. We live in a place where that's like more likely to be true than.
I see. So that's kind of like the tech, mecca, right?
Yeah, but there's lots of types of tech too, and I just think it's sort of funny that gaming is such a big part of that. I think a lot of not just our kids, but I think other kids in the class, I'm sure, grow up with the when they write, what do you want to be when you grow up? That's another thing. We did a project, maybe it was last year. It was like, what do you want to be when you grow up, for the 2nd grade class? I don't know how many of them put, I want to make video games or something. Like it did like a decent number of kids, and I think it's awesome. Again, it's a huge $200+ billion industry. It's a very viable career path, especially if you live here. Tons of companies between Nintendo and Valve and Xbox, Amazon, lots and lots of other company game developers as well. I think that's just kind of, that didn't exist when I was a kid.
Makes sense. And obviously it expanded even faster or bigger in the pandemic more recently, right? In the last 3-4 years that we've been experiencing it. In looking at your company Gamesight, if you could tell us a little bit about Gamesight, a brief introduction.
Yeah, sure. Gamesight's a marketing platform that's used by video game companies, specifically PC and console game companies, which are, it's like basically half plus of the video games industry is PC and console, and the rest being mobile games. So we're a marketing platform for those PC and console game companies. They integrate our technology into their games. We help them figure out where they should be spending their money, how they should be spending their money, what's effective, what's not. So we have some proprietary technology around that. It really is very purpose built for those types of companies, PC and console games, which have kind of a unique distribution channel compared to pretty much anything else on the internet. Most video games are not bought direct, right? Like most of them go through a platform. Like you buy it on your Switch, or you buy it on your Xbox, or even if you buy it from Best Buy, you still go play it through your Switch and through your Xbox or PlayStation or what have you. And so, there's some just real peculiarities of the way that, video games marketing works as distinct from anything else. And so most of the kind of technology stacks that would exist, for other digital companies, just like basically don't work for PC and console games, which is what we built our business on. We're about a 40-person company now. We are now fully remote, remote first. I mean, that's something that changed during the pandemic, but we were based in Seattle, and I don't know, we maybe have like a 15 people or something like that in Seattle. So Seattle's probably still the human hub, if you will, but the company is overall distributed.
Or if I can summarize it correctly, right? So you started out, you were exposed to the video game ecosystem. You liked games. You started playing them. You started building them. And then in the current efforts at Gamesight, you're helping or enabling other game developers or game creators, basically build audiences, right, to get users for their games. And so I'm curious how that shift happened, right? So you could have built a company like you did before, building games. And now it sounds like the Gamesight platform is actually to help enable the people who have built games get more users or more adoption.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's generally true. So, I think a couple points is like, I never built games myself. I've always built tools and services around the games industry. When I was a kid, like the first things I built were like review websites that told you which games were good, or told you, guide websites how to beat games. Like that was a big part of like kind of my business as a kid. It was like, how do you beat games, and in those guides on how to do. I mean, this was obviously early internet days. This stuff is now like, there's a million YouTube videos that, for any game that will tell you exactly, how to play it and how to beat it and do all the hard stuff. That was not the case in 1999. And then I built a pretty large business that I ran really all through college and all through grad school. That was a virtual goods distributor really for inside games. So you could buy, if you needed a sword in a game, or you needed virtual currency, you needed gold, gems, whatever the game had in the game, you could buy them with real money. And so I had a kind of large marketplace built for that I ran for many years. So yeah, I mean, it is funny, and I've worked in and around games for a very long time. I've never built a game. What's funny is I really don't have any desire to build a game ever, which maybe is, people sometimes find odd. Like, well, you work in games, don't you want to build games? Like, no, not really. I think one of the things I love about business now is that, we work with hundreds of games, and games are kind of like weird in the sense that you might spend 3 to 5 years building something, and then you launch it, and, you market it and promote it, and you try to get people to buy it and play it for, sometimes it's for a week, sometimes it's for a month, sometimes it's for 90 days. If you're really lucky, it's a thing that will run for years and years and years. But the vast majority of games don't work that way, right? Like there are multiple years worth of development for a kind of like one-shot payoff. And I think that's something that I don't think I have the right, like focus and passion to pick one game that I thought about nothing else for 3 to 5 years. I think I would go crazy doing that. Obviously not in that business, the business where I get to think, at least in as much as I think about those games, which is, less and less these days, as the company gets bigger and bigger, I'm further and further away from basically executional stuff and just doing business building things. But for a long time, I think that was something that, I loved being able to kind of just like go from game to game and focus on one problem, and, probably a little like your business as a consultant. It's like you get to really drill into one thing and think about that. But then a month or two later, you move on and you're doing something else.
Makes sense. Yeah, that's a very, I think, apt parallel or analogy in consulting. One of the reasons I like consulting personally, aside from, a couple of things I mentioned in our prep call, is the breadth right? You don't necessarily have to work on one problem or one problem set for a long period of time. Your clients do, definitely. So obviously, Gamesight's, being successful. I'm assuming the business you had before Gamesight was also quite successful. Are there patterns that you've seen in all the initiatives that you've tried, including even the philanthropic initiative or the foundation, nonprofit foundation you might have, patterns that have led to success or have enabled success in different initiatives?
Geez, that's a tough question. I don't know that I have a great answer off the top of my head of like what, kind of is consistent. So much of, I think, being an entrepreneur is solving problems that are novel for the first time. Like maybe I'm wrong and I've not started 20 companies. Some people have, and maybe if you do it that much, there is more of like kind of a science to it that you can put to it. It's like, okay, well, I always do this thing this way and I always do this thing this way. Maybe that is all true. I find that most of the hard problems and most of the problems that require the most time and also likely the most high leverage, like the ones that make the biggest difference between success and failure, are novel. Like you're figuring them out for the first time. You can rely on whatever first principles and things you might have that help you think about those problems, but at the end of the day, you're having to solve them for the very first time. And I think that's something that I didn't think was true, or maybe hoped wasn't true when I first started out. I mean, I relied a lot in probably my late teens, early 20s on, like find some mentors and ask them questions and hopefully they can answer kind of like these hard questions for you. And I did that. And what I found almost every time was it wasn't helpful. And not that these people didn't have good advice or that they weren't like trying to be helpful, but asking someone else like how to make a decision or like what decision to make is never really going to help you make good decisions, right? Like, you might make that right decision that one particular time, which is great, better that, I suppose, than making, just a straight bad decision. But so much of like my most important lessons, I think, are ones that like someone could have told me exactly what to do and not to do, and it wouldn't have mattered, right? Like I had to kind of learn that lesson myself and go through it. And so, yeah, I mean, certainly there are some things that I feel like, okay, well, I've learned and I can apply that across multiple things. But no, I don't know that I have, like, I wish I had some great, I mean, I would tell you my most stock advice when people say, which is, maybe another way that I could phrase this question is like my most stock advice when people say like, what's one piece of advice you'd give to, anyone who's doing a startup or whatever, an entrepreneur, is trust your gut is like the number one thing that I always go back to. And it's part and parcel of what I was just sort of talking about, which is, you do a bunch of research, you talk to a bunch of people, you survey people smarter than you who've been through it before and say, what should I do? How do I make this decision? And I think a lot of really smart people, that's what they do. They want to like ask a bunch of questions. They want to read, they want to find blog posts, they want to find, the answer. And like, the answer basically just doesn't exist, right? At least that has been my experience, is that the answer doesn't exist. And so if the answer doesn't exist, well, then you're stuck with, I think about it like these, kind of four quadrants, right? Like you have the choice, you have the decision to trust your gut and be right, which is the best choice, right? Like, you did what you thought was best to do and it worked out. And like, the thing works and it's a big success. Best option, right? The next best option, which is probably my biggest learning, is like you trust your gut and you're wrong, which seems like it would be an awful outcome. But really, as I sort of would have learned at some point in my life, is like, well, at least you got smarter. At least you figured out how to not screw that one particular thing up again, and you can like kind of learn a lesson. And then, the other two quadrants are where you've not trusted your gut. You've listened to what you read on the internet, or you've listened to what a great mentor said, or your friends recommended you do. And it's really, really hard to learn when you do that, right? Because all you have is this, kind of one example of like, okay, this thing worked and it did, or it didn't work, but the why behind it is something that is just really, really hard to glean when you didn't have to make that decision, or you didn't make the decision based on kind of your gut and instinct. So, and I think especially as, an entrepreneur, maybe this is true in other jobs. It's really the only job I've ever practically had, so it's kind of the job that I know the most about, is that people by and large are investing in you, are working for your company, are oftentimes being your early customer, like all of these things. They're doing that because they kind of trust your judgment, your gut, your instinct, whatever you want to call it. And I think that's something that is a really, I don't know, sort of like sacred bond when someone's like, look, I'm willing to be your first customer and use this product, which for sure is going to suck. It's for sure is not going to be as good as other things on the market. For sure is not going to have all the features I needed to have, but I'm willing to try it and use it because, I trust you and I trust you to make those decisions. And so when you don't kind of trust your instincts and instead you rely on other people to make those decisions, you're sort of like doing all those people, employees, customers, investors, like a disservice, because they ostensibly trusted you, which is why you're in that position in the first place. So it's a long-winded answer.
No. Actually, I think it's a very unique and insightful answer, right? Which is, if somebody else can give you the answer, usually you're probably not doing anything original, right? If I was to summarize what you said. And sometimes even when you are not doing something original, other people still can't give you the answer. You still have to figure it out for yourself or try it and see what happens. And you have to test your conviction. One of the questions as you were talking that came to mind is, you're saying that, okay, there are these people who are trusting you, whether it's your employees, your investors, your family. They'll trust you based on, I'm assuming they'll trust you based on something. And so, but how do you create that history so that they want to trust you or to want to go with you on the first step of the journey if they don't have any history with you? So I'm talking about the chicken and egg problem.
Yeah, I probably not the best person to ask this, because I have the odd story of always really being able to say, well, this is what I've been doing my whole life. So trust me, because this is my life's journey, my life's work, etc. And that's a powerful message to people, right? That they know that I've thought about professionally very little else besides the video games industry and all sorts of different facets of it. I mean, I think there are definitely elements of the industry that I probably know as much as anyone in the world on, and that is not a egotistical bullshit thing to say. It's I have spent that much time and energy doing it and saying, look, I have an idea of this product that could work this way, or this company that could work this way. I think, trust me. And, it's funny is because you don't really say that, right? When you're raising money, which is probably the best one, or you're recruiting someone, you don't really say, hey, trust me. But you kind of always, that's the implicit, the, the thing behind every single question you're asking, trust me on this. And, I think that passion is a huge piece of it. Now that I'm, it's funny how much I've learned, I do not a lot, but, a modicum of angel investing. And I definitely, invest in a few VCs. And so, I have much broader perspective now than I used to on what it's like to be on kind of the other side of the table when someone's asking you for money. And the thing that is probably stuck with me the most is passion, which is such a trite thing. Everyone always talks about it. But when you leave a meeting with an entrepreneur who is so passionate, is this is what they're going to do no matter what, because they basically can't not, that's a magnetic person typically that you want to be around. And, there's all sorts of problems that could exist with their business, but I think that kind of is the thing. I'll give you kind of the flip side, which is, advice, people ask me every now and then, for job advice. I'm a new college grad and I'm looking to get into the games industry, a super common thing I get asked. How do I do it? How do I get in? And I would say that the worst way to do it is to apply to 100 companies and go, I'm looking for a job. Please hire me. I want to work at a company. Well, no one wants to hire someone who wants to work at a company. People want to hire someone who wants to work at your company because you're, passionate about that thing. So, sometimes what I'll do, I don't know, it's my kind of Socratic method roots, is I'll be like, well, what's your favorite game? Oh, so-and-so. What's your favorite genre? Okay, cool. Well, why don't you go apply to work at those companies, the games that you play every day that you're passionate about, or, similar games like those. And they're like, oh, that'd be great. I love those games. And it almost sometimes seems like they never occurred to them that they should work on those games. But that's of course what you should work on, the thing that you're the most excited about, because when you're in that job interview and you're talking with the potential employer, it's gonna come through. It kind of can't not. And I think when you interview someone, and again, I think the exact same thing applies as in your fundraising. If it just seems like a science experiment you're conducting, or if it just seems like I don't know, a bunch of MBAs made a spreadsheet and this is the market opportunity. I don't know, maybe there are some investors out there, but I think for most angel investors and most VCs, that's not really that interesting, right? Is hey, this could work, sure, right? This is the thing you have to do because you love it and you're obsessed with it, and you can hear that in people's voice. So yeah, that would be my chicken and egg problem, is find the thing you're passionate about and just be passionate about it. And maybe I think sometimes it sounds easy, but it's maybe really, really hard to do. People do it with, I think, enthusiasm, which is different. And I think it actually kind of is an easy trait to mimic, right? Because you can use a loud voice and you can talk quickly and you can use great adjectives. And I know some really amazing sounding entrepreneurs who, maybe they're smart, good people and all that, but I think probably never will be the ultra successful, and success is a spectrum, but like that never will be the like industry defining anything, because they don't really care. Like it makes sense to them and they're happy to do it, and they can kind of like a good lawyer or whatever, right? Like you can work up a bunch of energy around a case, you can be excited about it, but like really having that passion, I think is just a different thing. And it's like it's maybe kind of hard to tease out. But I guess I feel like I can generally tell when someone's really passionate about something versus just like excited.
Digging into one of the earlier points you made, now you're playing the role of an investor sometimes. Do you attribute any more points to people who have, founded X number of successful companies before they're pitching you for the one that they're pitching you for? Does that change your filter, or how does that affect your filter?
I don't know. I mean, I think that everyone is, like angel investors, like kind of all have different motives and reasons. Like I would say I am hopefully my wife doesn't listen, but I would say I am not a like very like strictly financial investor. Like that just isn't the main reason. It's like, I don't know, reason number 4 probably that I do it, right? Like, so for me, that kind of like, no, sure, no one wants to invest in something that's just going to like flop, that never has a chance to succeed. I think like that's kind of obvious. But beyond that, that purely like, what's the mathematical percent likelihood for this thing to succeed? Yeah, sure. A multiple time entrepreneur, I think is almost certainly higher, likelihood of success. But I don't know, and there's probably data that could prove me right or wrong, that I would say in my experience, probably less likely to be the unicorn $1 billion company, more likely to have like, a success, like not a failure, but not, maybe lower, higher ceiling, lower floor, or sorry, higher floor, lower ceiling than a first time entrepreneur where who knows, sort of like anything could happen. Right? And I think that if that's what you're looking for, that kind of anything can happen. I think, you probably want someone who like that's their one thing, not just a thing. So I think they both have pros and cons, and I would say that I wouldn't have like a strong preference for one versus the other. To me, that is not really probably a huge part of the calculus, but I definitely would expect different pros and cons that come with that. And I would say passion is probably one of the things you get least. Actually, there's an entrepreneur I invested in who had a really solid exit. And he's just starting a new company right now. I actually emailed him about it maybe a couple hours ago. And he is now doing something that makes a lot of sense. And he, as the company that acquired him, he kind of saw this problem there and it's like, I could definitely solve this. And this is a good business and good market opportunity. And it's much more academic than passion. And so like, I think he'll probably be successful, but I also don't think he'll be successful at all costs. And I think that is one of the, kind of the magical things you get with the first time founder who's kind of doing their life's work in that first company, is like, that's their whole life. They will find a way to, if it can be successful, they will make it successful, where sometimes you get that, I guess like a little more of an academic thing where it's like, it might not work. I'll just, drop out. I'll give you some of your money back and move on to the next thing.
I see. Yeah, interesting, because there's some investors, if they have a risk management mentality, right, then they might opt for the founders that have a higher floor, lower ceiling, right? But then there are investors who are like, they're betting on the moonshot. So they want to bet on the moonshot. So they want to support the people who are betting on moonshots. And so for them, it's the higher ceiling that they're trying to figure out who are those entrepreneurs.
I think that's right. But I also think that you get a lot of second and third time founders that know that and are good at creating a narrative and market opportunity that maps to the moonshot. And actually, they're better at that because they kind of know that's the game they're playing. I don't know if this is exactly true, but I think it's like roughly true that the number one reason that most VCs say no to a deal is that they don't think it can return the fund, right? That just like the market opportunity for that company, like if everything were to go right, it's just not big enough. I think that's probably like the number one reason that someone, VC says no. And I think second time founders are way smarter. Like they're way more in tune to that, like the game of venture capital, that they know like, okay, well, can't say, got to make this total addressable market slide like really big, no matter what it takes to do that. And I think first time founders are, they're all different shapes and sizes in terms of how conservative or aggressive they are, but I don't know that they're all playing that same game of like, like you said, that kind of risk management game as well. So I think it can be harder to kind of tease out those two things. First time founder might have a larger, opportunity that they're maybe not as good at articulating just yet.
Okay. There's probably several more topics or questions there, but I'm going to switch gears a little bit, go to one of the areas I had mentioned earlier. All these people follow you or join you in your journey as an entrepreneur in their capacity as investors or employees or partners and whatnot. What happens when something doesn't turn out the way everybody expected or everybody had wished? And so there's setback, failure, or big lessons, etc. And then what have been some maybe notable examples of that for you that you're comfortable sharing, as well as how did the recovery happen?
Sure, yeah. I mean, definitely that's one of the hardest things when you're like, I guess, earlier in your career is like that failure. And I think so many, it's not just entrepreneurs, but like, startup people and high achievers, like they are not really used to failure, frankly. Like you imagine you're hiring an engineer who comes from, a top engineering school, comes from UW or whatever, right? Like this is a person who probably got, roughly 4.0s in college, probably had, stellar grades through all of college, great grades in high school, great grades through college, like probably has not experienced a whole lot of like failure. And startups broadly are about failure. More things don't work than do work, even when things are going well, like lots of things don't work. That's been my experience. And I think that can be really, really hard. It's definitely really hard for me earlier in my career. And I think probably the hardest part is knowing when something is a failure. Because I guess, there's kind of like two classes of failures at startups, right? There's just like total flop and doesn't work at all. I would say in my experience, I have been unfortunate to have very few of those. Very few things have just like straight like been zeros. Like this doesn't work. This doesn't make any sense. Blow the whole thing up, shut it down, whatever. Why? I don't know. Like, but that just like hasn't happened to me. I think that the class of failures I've had to deal with are much more of the like, well, it kind of worked, it's kind of good. Like, is it good enough? Can you, with time and money, can it go from good to great? Right. That is just so hard it's hard to figure out, like just intellectually, like it's just a really challenging problem. But then how you message that to, these constituents, like you said, you have probably, if you're the founder, you have family members, your spouse, your family who's sort of like supported you and probably doing something that is, I don't know, suboptimal from like a, lifestyle and career earnings standpoint. If you were a startup CEO, you probably make a lot more money doing something else. So you've got all those people that kind of, took that ride with you. You've got certainly employees, investors, customers. And I think it's really, really hard when you have something that like kind of works, right? Because you spend so much of your time telling people how something's going to work. That's like your job. It's like, hey, this thing is going to work. And here's all the reasons why. And obviously you should be, be honest and ethical about why you believe that and, the risks and whatever. But no one wants to join a company where the person recruiting them is telling them about like every way this company is going to fail. Like that just isn't how it works. You can be intellectually honest about reasons why something can fail, but you also need to be enthusiastic about why it's likely to succeed and why you're doing everything to make it succeed. And so I think that when you have to sort of say like, look, this thing is good, but it's not good enough. Yeah. I mean, that's probably like the hardest moments of my startup journey have been those exact moments where it's like, I've had to say, hey, this thing I've been telling you is going to work, might work, but probably not. Like, and sure, I told you probably last month, last week, last quarter that it was working because it was working to some extent, but it wasn't working to like kind of an extent large enough to continue to bet on it. And that like almost about face. And that's what it feels like. And I know that was probably the hardest part for me is like almost feeling like I had deceived people and it was never on purpose, right? I thought it was going to work, right? And then at some point you have to look back and go, you know what? The data just isn't strong enough to support that this thing, is going to get to scale. And, I had a company we built, we had like 3 million users. It was a B2C like consumer product. We had 3 million users and, I had all these really awesome growth charts and why things were going well. And then they kind of stalled out and there wasn't a whole lot of reasons for it other than like, I think we found roughly the 3 million people that are interested in this thing. There's not a lot more of them, or at least if there are, they're going to be really hard to find and really expensive to find. So like, while it went from 0 to 3 million and like the chart looked good, that it wasn't going from 3 to 30. And, that's kind of what it needed to do to really be a business. And like, yeah, it was so hard to go back and be like, yeah, I know just a month ago, I said like, we're going to the moon and we've got all these great data that tells us that. And like, I've got to come back to and be like, yeah, actually, maybe not so much. So yeah, I mean, advice for that, I don't know. Like, it just really really hard. Obviously being honest or whatever is part of it. But I think maybe the one piece of advice I say is like, now looking back, it wasn't as bad as I thought. Like, meaning like having to tell everyone that, like, I would say no one yelled at me. There's, all these people are going to yell at me and people are going to quit and people are going to like, give me my money back. And like, I just like never had to deal with any of that. Those were all the kind of worst fears. That's one of the tricks I think people tell you, right? Is like, speak all the worst fears out and be like, okay, well, what's going to happen? Oh, all these investors are going to like sue me personally for like, screwing this thing up. And you kind of go through it all and you're like, well, really none of that's going to happen, right? Like that's the worst case scenario isn't really that. Worst case scenario is people are going to be disappointed or mad or whatever, but like it was not a fraction of as bad as I had it worked up in my head for however long, 2 weeks or whatever it was in my head. So I kind of had to have that like, hey, this isn't going to work, guys moment. So yeah, maybe that's, I don't know, maybe someone could write in and tell me that they had the same issue and it was worse than they thought. Maybe there's another side of this coin.
There's obviously plenty of examples where the people who were part of the team or investors that reacted or they had much more destructive reactions, right? And I've been part of some of those situations. For me, right, it's like try not to have catastrophic failures, but you don't want to avoid all failures because then risk-taking and learning will stop. I guess speaking of that, I'm curious, what are the marching orders to your team members as far as how they should be taking or thinking about risk and what kind of risks do you encourage them to take versus, basically risk management or innovation? How do you push the envelope?
Yeah, I think that a lot of that is, cultural, which is like such a nebulous thing in this type of context. But I would say a lot of it is like what tone you set as the CEO, what tone the team leader set. You could say whatever you want. You could sort of say like, you can have one of your mantras be, take risks, move fast, break things. Like, there's a million things like that. Maybe those things work for people. I have found that like really what matters is like what's the observed behavior. Where we are now, and this has also changed over time. Like, and I don't know, maybe right or wrong, I think that that kind of risk tolerance probably should change over time, right? When you're first starting out, like you should be taking the biggest risks with, basically zero consequences because there are zero consequences. We now, for instance, now we have hundreds of customers. We have billions of players play games that run on our software. Like there are levels of risks that we just can't take because if we were to screw up, like, if we're like, hey, let's try to develop some crazy product that's built on top of some of this data and it like, I don't know, goes haywire or whatever, like you're talking about major consequences for lots of companies and a lot of people. And so there's sort of like a class of risk that we're no longer like super interested in taking. And I think, another example of that is like we are firmly entrenched in gaming, right? Like, I suppose there was a time in the world where maybe there was like a pivot to happen and we were going to be a healthcare company. Like that literally never happened or we was never discussed. But like, I don't know, there was a time when something like that at the right opportunity come about, we probably would have considered anything, right? You're trying to build a business, you're trying to build a big business. You're willing to kind of take the largest pivots possible. Like we're out of that game now, right? Like we're in the like, okay, well, we have a really defined customer group, really clear scope of customers, both in terms of like types of business, but also human beings on the other side. Like we know that the types of people we work with at our customer companies, and we are, now kind of scoped in our, innovation and risk taking around, well, how do we build better solutions? And I'll use that like broadly because I think we are like very open to all sorts of things, but within the scope of for these types of people at these types of companies. And so, yeah, I think, within that framework, which again is much more narrow now than it was, 5 years ago when we would have taken way more risks on that type of stuff. But within that framework, I would say we have like super high risk tolerance of like anything is worth talking about, anything is worth, discussing and, could be worth, bringing to customers. And I'd say that's, kind of our number one guiding light is always customers, right? And people have ideas all the time. And, my response, which again should be trickling down to the whole team is like, well, go talk to the customers about it. And if talk with 3 or 4 customers and you're like, hey, we've got this cool new chatbot thing we're trying to build into the product. What do you think of it? And 3 customers will go, wow, that's so amazing. I would love that. I'd love to pay you a bunch of money for it. Well, that's the thing we were going to probably build versus, I don't want someone sitting there spending 6 months working on some AI chatbot that no one has ever thought about or cares about or would be useful to them. So you want to talk with customers. You want to make sure that you're building something that they want. Got
it. Okay. Switching gears a little bit. I know we talked about in the beginning a little bit about the family, some of the causes that you have going on. So balancing the personal and the professional, you've been in entrepreneurship virtually all your professional life or even before, which usually is a very demanding journey, right? So how do you, are there techniques or experiences you've had that help you balance, life, the other factors or other aspects, family, health, etc.?
Yeah, I think there's probably like two things that I usually think about here. I think one was a piece of advice I got from a mentor when I was in grad school. He's a successful entrepreneur, and he said, you've got work, you've got your family, you've got your friends, you've got your hobbies. And he said, pick two. You can do two of those things well. The other ones you won't do a good job of. Hobbies, friends, family, and work, right? And I think, he sort of like, I think was taking work as one of them by default, right? Like if at least as an entrepreneur, I don't think that's probably true for every job in the world, but for a startup CEO is like, assume work is one of them. You have these three other major spheres, pick one, and you can do a great job at that. But if you try to do a great job at all of them, you'll do a bad job at all of them. And maybe not the most inspiring advice, but definitely something that I have found to be broadly true. Like I do not have the bandwidth in my life to, like, I used to play golf when I was in grad school. I played golf like 4 or 5 days a week. I have played golf since my kids have been born. I've played golf. They're 9. I played golf 9 times. I played golf basically once a year for their entire life. That's a hobby of mine that I've roughly had to give up. I don't have to, sure. Like I could still play golf. There is no doubt that it would be a sacrifice. Something else would have to give. And so that's either, work or family. So my two are family. If I had to pick those two things, my two would be family and would be work. And I, for sure, over the last decade, have been a much worse friend than I was the decade before. I have been much worse at my hobbies than I was the decade before. And I guess that's like sort of the trade-off I've made. So I'd say that's kind of like one, again, probably the least inspiring advice, because it's like, can't you have it all? Maybe some people can. I can't.
Right. I mean, we're interested in, what's worked for you, right? And if it's worked for you, it's worked for you. And perhaps there's another subset of people it could work for. But physics of life is real for all of us. You can't have everything. So at some point, you do have to prioritize.
You have to prioritize. And I would say the other thing, which is I found out about myself, which is when I go on vacation, and I do go on vacation, my wife and I, we like to go away, sometimes do family vacations, but when we just do like the two of us and we go to Mexico or something. Earlier on in my career, I used to be like, okay, I'm on vacation, so I'm not going to check my email. And if I did, my wife would sort of be like, well, got to get off your email. What are you doing? You're on vacation. And it was like just a point of contention and stress. And this was maybe 4 or 5 years ago, I sort of like realized that is stressful to me. And what is less stressful is sort of figuring out what's the minimum viable amount of work I need to do on vacation to feel like I'm still plugged in, to feel like, if there's anything major, I'm still around to address it. And when I do that, and I can kind of like check in throughout the day or throughout the vacation and then, go back to vacation, I have a way more relaxing vacation. And again, maybe not going to be true for everyone, but for me to sort of, I guess, like let myself off the hook and say, look, this is how I have to have a relaxing vacation, and maybe other people wouldn't do it that way. But, my wife has all these pictures of me over the years now where I'm at the beach with my laptop, or I'm in a pool with my laptop or something like that. And, maybe I spent an hour a day on that trip sort of being connected to work, but then I was really able to enjoy the rest of the time, rather than, sitting there at dinner with in my back of my head going like, I haven't checked my email all day. I wonder if there's something I'm missing. Like there's a customer that's trying to get a hold of me, or there's, an employee that has some urgent thing, to just like not have that nagging feeling. So yeah.
So basically time boxing. Sounds like time boxing.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know that I consider it that, because I definitely don't do like, well, it's, I need 1 hour, like some specific thing. I'm familiar with sort of time boxing in general. I think it's a useful tool. I think for me, it's more about full unplug, which I think a lot of people, that's what they want to do on their vacation, and that's relaxing to them. I think for me, that is stressful. And so maybe the meta advice is like, finding out what works for you, instead of having to be like, well, people say that you're supposed to unplug fully on vacation. It's like, well, who cares what people say? That doesn't work for me. That's stressful for me. I should just do the thing that actually works for me. And I think that's something that, especially with stuff like that, I think where I feel like it feels more foreign to me. Like, how do you relax? Like, that wasn't a thing when you're 22 you've ever think about, right? How to like, how do you decompress? How do you relax? How do you, unplug? Those are just not concepts that really exist. And then at some point they become these super important concepts when you've got kids and full career where like that stuff actually matters. So it is kind of funny that they're like basically skills that you don't think about or need to develop until you do.
Well, you've been very generous with the time here, and we have a few more minutes. As I was mentioning in the outline, some of the guests wanted to ask me questions. And this is, we have a couple of minutes for you to do that if you wish. So you don't feel like the punishment is only going one way.
Yeah, no, it's not punishment for me. I love doing things like this. I think they're really helpful to kind of reflect on your own philosophy. Sounds a little bit overselling it, but like, your how you actually think about things. It's actually one of the things that I've really probably got the most out of, kind of being an investor, being an advisor, is when you kind of have to think of like, okay, well, how would I explain this to someone, right? It makes sense to me in my head, but like, how would I explain this to someone? In doing that, I think can really help refine your thoughts. So, whether it's personal stuff or professional stuff, having to really talk about it in a moment when you're not deep into it, I think is really helpful. So what was the question that you asked me that I said I didn't have a good answer for? And I'm forgetting which question that was, because I want to ask you what your answer for that one. That one.
Oh, patterns for success.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Thank you. Patterns for success across, I guess like, personal, professional, etc.
Yeah, so I think in a way you gave the answer, I would say, but to a different question, which is about passion and being passionate, right? So what I've found, and there are some scriptures in Hinduism that allude to this, and I'm not a observing Hindu by many standards, but if you apply the energy or you apply the inputs, success will come. What you can't predict is the form it'll take, right? And so that's kind of tied to one of the things you were talking about when you're like determining, trust me on this one, but then how do you demonstrate that you are trustworthy, right? It's through the passion that oozes out of you. What are the concrete signals that demonstrate somebody's passionate? It's about how much energy they're putting towards the goal that they say that they're going after. That tells you how passionate they are about something. And so what I found is that when people are passionate and they're committed, which is another thing that kind of overlays with passion, then that's the best way to increase your odds for success. The thing that doesn't happen or doesn't always happen is that the success the form takes, or the form in which that success comes, may look quite a bit different from what you started with. And this has happened to me in many aspects of life, but also in different startups and, the proverbial pivot, right? People do. Because you have a committed team, you might have a committed set of investors, founders, employees, and then something's not working out, but nobody's prepared to go home, right? And they pivot and they do something else. So I think commitment and passion and the inputs applied have, in my experience, been the patterns, or those ingredients have been consistent in patterns that have created success. And then oftentimes the opposite has also been seen, right? Where you'll hire somebody or somebody's on your team, they're not able to create results. And then when you zoom out and you look at their progress, you could tell, oh, okay, on such and such time or at such and such time, this person wasn't simply putting in the inputs or applying themselves. And of course, they weren't going to be successful as a result. So I'm not sure if that kind of is consistent maybe with your observations in the situations that you've been part of.
Yeah, no, it's funny because I don't know that I've ever had a great way that I feel like I could articulate it, because I had a mentor sort of explain this to me once early on, where it was like when I was graduating school, and it was like before I raised money for the very first time, I was sort of talking about the basically pros and cons of doing that. Like, I had some money from the company that I was doing. I was like, I can just like self-fund this, and like, there's sort of like less pressure and all these things. And either way, what he ended up explaining to me was that as an entrepreneur, everything you do, kind of what you were just saying, like all of your actions, like those are all you investing in your career, right? Every customer you meet, every investor you meet, whether they invest or not, all the, employees, all of the community that you build in the city you're in, like all of those things are basically like, you get to keep that at the end of the day. And I think that was something that was hard for me to maybe understand at the time, like, right, because it just doesn't feel the same as like, you graduate school, you get a degree, or, you go work at Google for 2 years and you got it on your resume, worked at Google for 2 years. And like, that's this sort of credential you kind of keep. And there's something like more nebulous about like being a startup founder, where you're like, well, what if I do this thing and it just like fails after a couple of years? What, I'm going to go around and tell everyone I'm a big failure? And I think that, sort of what you said kind of resonated with me, just about you apply all of this effort and energy into something, but like what comes out of it, you just don't know. Like you can't know what comes out to start, but that doesn't mean it's like, a less worthy pursuit or you're wrong, but that those actions matter. And so how you treat people, and that was part of his advice, was like, all of these interactions you have, like I said, with investors that don't invest in you, employees that don't join your company, like all of those things have potential long-term positive externalities for you, no matter what you do. And I think that really internalizing that has definitely changed my perspective on like really how I kind of like operate the business, and how I operate in the business is each one of those touch points is part of the career development, I guess, that I'm engaged in, because otherwise I have my resume looks weird or lame.
One of the big goals, and I think you've ably helped us accomplish this is to increase empathy and curiosity. And that's what we're trying to do through this podcast. It's been great having you. We'd love to have you again, and would love to give you an opportunity here for a few seconds to include your parting thoughts.
There isn't a single path to any of these things. And I think that in the world we live in now, and part of this I see really, really distinctly in video games, is like there's so much emphasis in society on like the best, on like what is the answer, like what is the optimal way to do it. Well, and so many games are really built on that concept of, right, like how do you build the best base, how do you have the best strategy for how to beat this boss, and like there's something, and I think this is a big part of why video games are so successful, is there's something really satisfying to having a scoped problem, beat a boss, build a base, beat a level, whatever it is, not knowing how to do it, figuring out how to do it, and then accomplishing it, right? And then I think more so, which so many games do a great job of now, is then like the next level is like mastery. Okay, fine. It's not just, can I beat this level? It's, can I beat this level without dying? Can I beat it under a certain time? And like all these various things that I think our brains love, because they're these non-scary problems, because our brains can wrap around them. We understand what they are. Everyone has their own preference to whether they want to figure out the solution. They want to watch a YouTube video to figure out the solution. Again, I think this isn't just, video games is a microcosm of that, but it's the same with, cooking, right? Like what is the best, way to make an omelet? What is the best way to make a chocolate chip cookie? Like I just think so much of our world is around this kind of like best, most optimal, most efficient stuff. And the world just doesn't really work that way. Like we want it to, because like it would be easier. And I wish that like, everything was that, where it's like, oh, well, here's the answer. You want to build a multi-billion-dollar business? Well, here, follow these 10 steps. Like, it doesn't work that way, or everyone would do it, obviously. And I think that, hopefully your kind of mission here helps with, that there are different paths, there's different strengths or different weaknesses. There's people who probably don't check their phone on vacation and are very successful. And there's people like me that, maybe people look at as weird because I'm in the pool at the resort on my laptop sending work emails. And they're like, well, what's up with this weirdo? But I think, everyone kind of has their own things that work for them, and kind of just hearing other people's stories, like I guess just like, recognize that.
No, it's awesome. Well, that's a good way to wrap, Adam, that everybody's journey is unique and there's value in just learning about what other people's journeys have been. And thanks for sharing your journey with us here.
Yeah, absolutely.